Shabbat shalom lechulam. So good to see everyone. I wanted to begin with a movie reference. In the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, there's this conversation that the mother has with the daughter. And I thought about this week's Parshat Shoftim. You're going to see why. So in the scene, the mother of the bride, she's consoling her daughter, whose father would not let her attend college because that's not what good Greek girls do. So the daughter, Tula, says, "Ma, Dad is so stubborn. What he says goes. The man is the head of the house." And her mother, Maria, says, "Let me tell you something, Tula. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn the head any way she wants." So as this is our 20th wedding anniversary, I have to share something I've never shared before about the Baum men, going back to my great-grandfather Alexander. The men in my family, we have always married strong women who make us think that we're in charge. But in the end, it is our wives, our partners, who make our heads turn, our heads in whatever direction they want. So I'm grateful for that. But it's not just the Baum women who have an aversion to the man as the head of the household. A person who's the head of countries or people are called kings and queens, or a person, right? Kings and queens. In America, we don't do well with this idea of the patriarchy, a system where the man is in charge of everything. This summer, our country celebrated 250 years of independence from the crown. In other words, the king. The king is not a symbol that Americans even connect to or like, because rebellion against the king and giving power to the people is what this whole system is based on. And yet, over the high holidays, which we are in that season right now, we are bombarded with messages of God is the king. And so how do we make sense of this word, melech, king, without having to trade our ideals, our values? And that's what I want to talk about today. And it actually does connect to this week's parsha and what we read in Shoftim. In this week's parsha, we're introduced to the concept of the Jewish king. And there's an interesting story found near the beginning. Moses tells the people that if they feel they have to appoint a king to rule over them, like all the other nations, the king has to be an Israelite, cannot have too many horses or wives or silver or gold that will let his heart go astray. Unfortunately, it's a king and not a queen here, so that is the idea here. And then he adds, when he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching, HaTorah Hazot, written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. And he says, let it remain with him and let him read it all the days of his life so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily towards his fellow, or deviate from the instruction to the left or to the right, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. So what we see here is this undertone that leadership, or that all of these things of wealth and power, it can be seductive. Absolute leadership can be seductive. And that's why he is warned not to amass all of these things. But the answer is, what's going to keep this king honest? And the answer is himself. Through the Torah, its teachings, its values, the story of our people. We have here a situation where the king has to have a Torah with him at all times. And it says that it's written by the priest, but actually the language doesn't actually translate to that. It says, he shall write a copy of this teaching for himself on a scroll from one that is in the charge of the Levitical priests. In other words, the king had to write these words, write an entire Sefer Torah by himself. Now, when we who in here still writes with a pen and paper? Like very few of us. When we write, it's proven, when we write with a pen and paper, we actually internalize the words. We remember them better. And it's probably because it takes more time. Ramban, the famous medieval biblical commentator, writes that this verse is here to teach us that the Jewish king needs to internalize the eternal lessons of the Torah and the lessons that will remain with the king all the days of his life, not just because he reads it, but because he wrote it himself. So the king might develop carpal tunnel syndrome, that's true, because he wrote it, but that's how he was able to truly take hold of the Torah and not forget them, especially during the times when it's convenient to forget ethics and values that we hold dear. And so now I transition to the high holidays. The imagery of God as king is front and center. We're going to be singing HaMelech. And in Unetana Tokef, arguably the most memorable piyut or poem of the high holiday season, we read the following. Behold, the day of judgment, the hosts of heaven are mustered for judgment, for they cannot be innocent in your eyes. And we're talking about your, the capital U, capital Y. All who enter the world pass before you like a flock of sheep, as a shepherd musters his flock, causing them to pass beneath his staff. So do you, capital Y, cause every living being to pass before you, and you count and reckon and consider the faith of every creature, inscribing their verdict. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. How many shall pass on? How many shall be born? Who shall live and who shall die? Etc. God here seems to be the ultimate king. In the poem, even the angels are trembling before God speaks. But does this poem really give us the picture of a God who has this absolute power, who has the final say? So I wanted to share some teachings from a recent seminar I attended with Rabbi Eli Confer, who's the founder of the Hadar Institute, Machon Hadar. And he taught that the word ma'avir in the Unetana Tokef, which means cause to pass, is mentioned 7 times in the poem. When something is mentioned 7 times, it says the poet wants us to pay attention. So here's what he taught. He said each appearance of this word draws on a different biblical or rabbinic source, and each source offers a different picture of God. The poem is not giving us just one theology, it's layering several and sometimes contradictory images of the divine, of God. The first appearance, I'm not going to go through all 7, just 3, don't worry. The first one is Kol ba'olam ya'avurun lefanecha kivnei maron. All who enter the world pass before you like a flock of sheep. Or in an older reading, it's actually a military formation, like an army. And I want you to picture that for a second. God as this general, an army passing before an inspector. Everyone's in a uniform. Nobody is standing out. Everyone looks the same. And if that were the only picture that the poem gives us of God, we'd have every reason to be terrified in this moment. This is a God who reviews us, like I said, like a general, looking at us. It's very impersonal. It's like checking off a list. But the poem doesn't stop there. A few lines later, the same word returns, but in a very different key. Ma'avir tzono tachat shifto, causing the flock to pass beneath the staff. So now we have the imagery of the shepherd. And this line is actually quoted from Ezekiel 34. And Ezekiel gives a different interpretation here. He's describing God rescuing a flock from bad shepherds. Ezekiel speaks on God's behalf, and he says about leaders who eat the fat and eat the fat, the forbidden fat they shouldn't be eating, and clothe themselves with wool, but do not feed the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, healed the sick, or sought the lost, Ezekiel says. And God's response isn't to punish the sheep. Rather, it's to fire the shepherds. Ezekiel says, I myself will search for my sheep as a shepherd seeks out his scattered flock. So now we're out of the courtroom. And now we're stepping into a God who steps in on our behalf against the leaders who failed us. God is like our special witness coming up to save us. And this is the difference between a king who inspects his subject and a king who protects them from the people who were supposed to be protecting them and weren't. And this is the very same anxiety that our Parsha Shoftim is trying to solve. Shoftim doesn't just tell us to appoint a king. It opens the Parsha by saying, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha bechol sha'arecha, appoint judges and officers in all of your gates. And then a few verses later, warns those very judges not to twist justice or take bribes. The word is lo takir panim, do not show favoritism. And Ezekiel's corrupt shepherd, they're exactly what Shoftim is trying to prevent here. And the Unetana Tokef, on the holiest day of the year, tells us, even when human shepherds fail, even when the judges take the bribes, even when the king lets his heart go astray, there is still a shepherd who comes looking for the ones who are lost. And now I want to go to the third one. Later in the poem, this one I find most moving of all. It describes how fleeting a human life is. Like a shattered pot, withered grass, a fading flower, a passing shadow. The poet borrows the word sel over, a passing shadow, straight from Psalm 144. And if you look at the psalm, what it does with the image, it doesn't end in despair. It uses that line, our smallness, basically our fleeting existence, says, bend your heavens, God, and come down. Reach out your hand and rescue me. In other words, yes, my days, our days are like a passing shadow. And that is exactly why I have the right to call out to you, God, notice me, look at me, see me. So I come back to this idea of what is the God that Unetana Tokef is describing? The inspecting general, the rescuing shepherd, the one who bends down to save a fading shadow, to look at each one of us individually. Which one is the true king? And Rabbi Confer's answer was all three. And I think he's right. The Unetana Tokef does not just give us one theology, because none of us live under one theology. Some years, we feel like we're counted like troops in a line. Some years, we know exactly what it feels like to be failed by the people who are supposed to shepherd us. And some years, all we can say is, God, I am fragile as a shadow, and just come find me anyway. Our Parsha gives us this human king who can only be trusted because he's bound with his hand and his mind to a Torah that he wrote himself, and he carried it with him all of his days and read it every day. This was a built-in check against a heart that might otherwise go astray. And the Unatana Tokef gives us a very different view of God, a very different view of that king, who is the King of Kings, one who doesn't need to be restrained because God acts with both strength and mercy. God acts with judgment and love, all at the same time. Today, Alyssa and I are celebrating our anniversary, but every year during Elul, our people celebrate this anniversary too. One of the acronyms for Elul is Anila Dodi V'Dodi Li. I am my beloved's and my beloved's is mine. And that is a relationship that we're trying to build with God. It's a renewal of a covenant every year. Before we come to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we get into relationship with God again. And so as we remember, or as we enter this Elul, let us remember that our tradition teaches us that when the king leaves the palace and goes out into the field, as the famous teaching from Rabbi Shur Zalman Liadi, God is not waiting on his throne for us to come find him. But God is walking among us. He's ready to be met wherever we are. The same king who searches for his scattered flock. The same king who bends down to notice even a passing shadow. This is Elul. This is the field. This is the king. And as I thought about these words, I said, now that is a king that I can believe in. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom